The garage door looked normal from the street, but the neighborhood didn't. Phones were up on the sidewalk, neighbors clustered like spectators at a slow-motion crash. Through the narrow top windows of the three-bay garage, two black SUVs sat inside, perfectly parked, perfectly wrong, where a workbench should have been. A heavy padlock hung on a steel side hasp, bright in the sun, final as a courtroom stamp. Far down the street, a marked car with police on the side idled without urgency, watching more than acting. In the center of it all stood Garrett Coleman with a keyring resting in his palm, posture calm and immovable. Near him, Sandra Whitfield in a spotless dark pink blazer radiated outrage as if anger alone could unlock metal. The vehicles inside were not leaving today. Garrett had bought the house on Tamber Lane for one reason: the detached three-bay garage. 14-foot ceilings, thick concrete, enough room for a table saw, planer, band saw, and lumber racks without the space feeling cramped. After 22 years as an Army combat engineer, he wanted work that built something lasting: clean joinery, reclaimed wood, furniture made to outlive trends. The garage was his decompression, his second career, and the one place where rules were real because physics enforced them. His wife, Claire, worked long shifts as an ER nurse and understood pressure better than anyone on the block. She liked the workshop because it steadied him, and she liked the house because she could see the garage from the kitchen window. Ridgehurst Estates ran on the opposite of that logic: appearance-first governance and a board that treated preferences like law. At the top of that board sat Sandra Whitfield, polished, relentless, and increasingly fixated on the one property in the neighborhood she could not order into compliance. Sandra's first real strike landed while Garrett was away handling his mother's death and the long administrative grief that follows. She announced a community protection program and branded it like a professional agency, complete with matching uniforms and official-looking decals. Two hires arrived under a private security name: Hank Tully, rigid and eager to perform authority, and Wade Pittman, comfortable and detached, happy to collect a check. Sandra put them in black polos with HOA printed large and gave them two used black SUVs marked HOA Security in blunt white letters. Then she needed somewhere to park the image she had purchased. A rail guard station would require permits, money, and scrutiny. Garrett's empty three-bay garage solved every problem at once. The takeover happened fast, tools pushed aside, a folding table planted where precision work belonged, a cheap coffee machine humming on an outlet wired for shop equipment. The workshop wasn't borrowed. It was repurposed, turned into a stage where Sandra could pretend the neighborhood had its own law enforcement wing. Claire came home from a hard hospital shift and found the garage glowing with new fluorescent lights that didn't match the home's warmth. The air smelled like stale coffee and rubber floor mats layered over sawdust and varnish. Garrett returned to clamps dumped into crates, lumber stacked carelessly, and a half-finished piece covered like it was disposable. He didn't explode, he focused. That restraint only encouraged Sandra. Violation notices began arriving with confident formatting and hollow authority, citing a resolution that shouldn't have passed and demanding access to what was never HOA property. The citations grew bolder: parking in his own driveway, minor lighting changes, anything that could be dressed up as interference. Hank and Wade began stopping deliveries at the curb, hovering at the driveway edge like gatekeepers, making customers feel questioned just for picking up furniture. Orders vanished not because Garrett's work declined, but because the driveway started looking like a checkpoint. Then Sandra hinted at the next squeeze: a special assessment for expanded security operations if the community didn't comply. The conflict stopped being a garage problem. It became a neighborhood leverage campaign. Garrett treated the situation the way he had treated worse, with documentation and timing. He requested HOA financial records under state law, forcing the association to hand over budgets, invoices, and bank statements. The papers arrived in messy piles, as if chaos could hide intent. Garrett and Claire sorted it like triage: contracts in one stack, transfers in another, vendor invoices separated until patterns appeared. A guard station had been funded months earlier, paid for by homeowners, yet nothing had been built. No permits, no footings, no visible project. The money hadn't evaporated, it had moved into a friendly vendor trail connected to Sandra's family circle. The garage takeover suddenly made a darker kind of sense. It wasn't just ego. It was a workaround to hide a missing project and avoid questions the neighborhood would ask if a promised building never appeared. Garrett copied everything, organized binders, and filed complaints where they belonged. Then he upgraded locks, installed cameras, and wired a commercial-grade deadbolt system that controlled the garage from inside the home. He waited for a routine day, when the SUVs would be parked inside and the men would leave believing the space belonged to them by default. The lock engaged with a single mechanical click. Small sound, enormous consequence. The SUV sat inside the garage, but no people were trapped. Hank and Wade had already driven home. That distinction mattered. Garrett wasn't imprisoning anyone. He was reclaiming his property and preserving evidence. By morning, Sandra arrived furious enough to draw attention from half the street. She yanked handles, tested doors, and performed disbelief as if volume could rewrite ownership. Neighbors gathered again, the same ones who had stayed quiet during fines and notices, now watching because the power shift was visible and undeniable. Far down the road, the marked police car returned, and after a brief review of boundaries and paperwork, it remained only an observer to a civil dispute. The locksmith Sandra tried to recruit refused. The HOA attorney couldn't transform laminated paper into authority. Sandra's operation had uniforms and decals, but not jurisdiction. The garage stayed locked. Hour by hour, her protection force looked less like security and more like a costume collapsing in public, and the entire street could see it. On the third day, the community meeting room filled past capacity, not because residents suddenly loved governance, but because they sensed the truth was finally about to surface. Garrett didn't arrive with rage, he arrived with binders. Deeds and survey lines. Photos of displaced tools and damaged storage. Utility spikes. The void resolution. The citations. Delivery interruptions. Then the part that changed the air in the room, financial records showing money collected for a guard station that never existed, and a vendor trail tied to Sandra's family network. Faces shifted as the math landed. People who had begged for peace realized they had paid for silence. People who had feared retaliation realized retaliation had been the business model. Sandra's confidence held for a moment, then shrank under the weight of receipts. The vote to remove her leadership wasn't close. The HOA protection force dissolved as quickly as it had been invented. The SUVs were collected, the garage reopened, and Garrett's workshop returned to what it was built for, building, not defending. In the months that followed, the HOA tightened audit rules, rewrote meeting procedures, and stripped the board of shortcuts that allowed one person to weaponize rules. Garrett restored the shop and started weekend woodworking classes for local teens, quiet proof that boundaries can be enforced without cruelty. If an HOA tried to claim part of your home as community property, would you freeze, fold, or fight back with paperwork, and what would you want your neighbors to do?